Times of crisis and grave threats often mean extraordinary measures. It requires extraordinary leaders and granting those leaders the means to do the job required. In this story, the situation is so pressing, it leads to a man becoming dictator, with no restraint on his rule. In the annals of ancient Rome, few figures stand as tall as Lucius Quintius Cincinnatus, the legendary hero who saved Rome from its enemies and embodied the virtues of duty, honour and selflessness. His story is one of a reluctant hero, a humble farmer, who was called upon to assume the most powerful position in the Republic in a time of crisis. It's also the story of courage and leadership, of a man who rose to the occasion and led his people to victory against overwhelming odds. Cincinnatus, who lived between 519 and 430 BC, was a farmer turned leader, and is a figure whose legacy has endured for centuries. His story has inspired leaders and common people alike to aspire to a higher standard of leadership and service. His rise to power was immediate. Cincinnatus was called upon to become a dictator. In ancient Rome, a dictator was a magistrate who was appointed by the Roman Senate in times of crisis, usually during a military emergency or a threat to the state. The dictator was granted almost unlimited power to act on behalf of the Republic and to take any measures necessary to protect the state. The appointment of a dictator was a drastic step, as it meant suspending many of the normal constitutional rights and procedures of the Republic. The dictator was chosen for a period of 6 months or less, and during this time he had complete control over the military, the courts, and the government. Rome was enduring a time of crisis, when the city was threatened by invasion from neighbouring tribes. The Roman Senate, faced with an immediate need for a strong leadership, turned to Cincinnatus because of his reputation as a skilled and honourable leader. He had previously served as a Roman consul with distinction. Although Cincinnatus was known for his leadership skills, he preferred a simple life as a farmer. According to historical accounts, he had retired from public life and was working in his fields when a delegation arrived on his farm. They explained the situation to him and asked him to come to Rome and take command of the Republic as a dictator. Despite his reluctance, he accepted the role out of a sense of duty to his country and a commitment to serving Rome and its people. During his appointment as dictator in 458 BC, Cincinnatus was faced with the daunting task of leading a Roman army against the neighbouring Aqui and Volsci tribes. They were threatening to overrun the city of Rome and had completely surrounded the Roman army at Mount Algidus. According to ancient accounts, Cincinnatus quickly set about organising the defence of the city, raising a new army from every man of fighting age and reorganising the existing troops. He led the Roman army to Mount Algidus and secured victory against the Aqui and Volsci, ultimately forcing them to surrender. This victory secured Rome's borders and prevented the city from being overrun by its enemies. After only 15 days of service, Cincinnatus returned to his life as a farmer, choosing a humble existence over the trappings of power and influence. He gave up the dictatorship. If once wasn't enough, Cincinnatus was called upon to become dictator a second time, several years after his first term. According to historical accounts, he was appointed to the position, this time during a time of internal political crisis in Rome. He was appointed dictator in 439 BC, when there were tensions between the patricians and the plebeians. The situation had become so severe the Senate turned to Cincinnatus to restore order. Cincinnatus was able to reconcile the two factions, and he resigned his position just 21 days later. After his second turn as dictator, he once again retired to his farm and refused all offers of political power or influence. Throughout history, there's been many admirers of Cincinnatus, and some people have been compared to him. George Washington, the first President of the United States, was often compared to Cincinnatus, both during his lifetime and after. Like Cincinnatus, Washington was a military leader. He served 2 terms of office and voluntarily gave up power, returning to civilian life. Washington was known for his integrity, humility, and commitment to Republican values, and this led many to view him as the modern-day embodiment of the Roman ideal of civic virtue, exemplified by Cincinnatus. Another admirer, who actually compared himself to Cincinnatus, was former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. During his last speech as Prime Minister, in July 2022, Boris Johnson said,
"And like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough."
He didn't mention the part where Cincinnatus returned to power several years later.